Welcome to Collector's Corner, the premier digital art platform.
We help collectors gain and maintain their edge, all while appreciating beautiful art.
Let's jump in.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Collector's Corner. My name is P. You may know me online as @AstonCloud. I'm joined by my co-host, Jared, who you may know online as @Jared_pause. And we have two fantastic guests here. We have Rick and Rich, and I'll let them introduce themselves quickly in a second here. But we're talking about an amazing collection that dropped on fxhash lately and diving deep into it called Acequia. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going to pronounce it wrong. I've been pronouncing it wrong forever. So you guys correct me ASAP. Just a tiny bit of house cleaning before I throw it over to see how you all are doing. This is a video episode. Please check it out on video. We're going to show some beautiful art that these gentlemen worked really, really hard on. So check it out. And if you're not able to, that's okay. You can follow along on a podcast, and we'll be releasing a tweet with some of this fantastic art as well. Also, just any disclaimers. Really, I own some of these pieces. I'm actually not sure if Jared does, so we'll mention that as we go through, but own pieces from this. And we'll have timestamps in the show notes so you can jump to parts you like. And finally, I just want to say we've launched a newsletter. Check it out. People are really enjoying it. It'll help you keep up with Gen Art Weekly. Other than that, please subscribe, like, comment, and review. Okay, now that all that is out of the way, how's everybody doing? Maybe we'll go quickly to Jared and then Rich and Rick. How are you all doing today?
I'm doing amazing. As indicated earlier, I'm triple fisting here. I got water, tea, and coffee. So it's one of those days, but I'm super, super excited for this project. And officially, what is the pronunciation? Because I know for a fact I butcher it by saying, I'm not even going to go there, but what is the official pronunciation?
So it's a Spanish word. It's Acequia. And it's written in the description of the project. Actually, it's derived from the Arabic word which means water carrier. So, Acequia.
Brilliant. That we will never mispronounce it again.
We just got to keep saying Acequia, Acequia. Amazing. Thank you, Rick. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks. Yeah, it's lovely to be here, and I'm just excited to talk about the project. It was a big project. We spent a lot of time on it, and yeah, it's launched a while ago, so I have to kind of refresh my memory and get back into it.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time, and I think the listeners will really enjoy it, getting to know this collection even more than they already do. It's obviously been very popular, so maybe we'll have some Easter eggs for folks as well. Rich, how are you doing?
Hey, really good, thank you. Yeah, quite nice for once being in New Zealand. I think I've got the better end of this deal. It's only just coming up 10:30 in the morning here, so as you can see, Rick's got the other end of that, so it's getting already quite late for him. But yeah, I'm looking forward to diving back into the collection. Actually, it's been coming up 3 months now since it actually was released. So it was a heck of a blur up to it, and then quite a blur afterwards, actually. So it's been quite nice kind of revisiting it in a slightly more leisurely pace over the last few days, picking things out to discuss today.
Yeah, it was fun to watch your journey on Twitter, just talking about how the project came together, the integration and collaboration that each of you had, and just I remember watching almost with a little bit of anxiety the days coming up to the release, with just pulling all the details together. It was so much fun, and both of your transparency in the process was fun. So I think it was part of the journey for this release that obviously the outputs were amazing, but that level of transparency was fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's so many things to consider when you're doing a project, not just the art and the code and all of that, but also the strategy for, letting people know about it and how much you give away and how much you hold back. And so we kind of teased it we worked on the project for a long time. We teased it very slowly over that period and then kind of ramped it up near the end because, there's something about getting that right too,
Yeah, I think that's really true. Yeah, and I think particularly because it had run on for kind of quite so long, I think there's almost a sense of we both were like, wow, this is actually happening. We're finally releasing this project that we've been working on for 4 or 5 months, and then we spent so much time agonizing on kind of like, how many do we do? And fxhash was quite quiet at the time, so like, we don't want to do too many because we want them each to feel special. And so yeah, it was quite strange. And I think being a collab, I think anytime you release a project, there's always nerves, but I think when it's a collaboration, it's almost worse because if you do your own project and it bombs, you go, okay, you trashed your own reputation. But if it bombs as a collab, you're like, oh no, I've taken someone else down with me as well. And I think particularly for Rick, because we'd done kind of a previous project, but otherwise he hadn't really done like kind of generative projects. So I was very aware of kind of not wanting to be responsible for him going, I'm never doing this stuff again. It's awful. I wanted him to have such a positive experience from it as well.
Oh, come on. Miniscapes was an amazing output. And you guys work very brilliantly together. That's part of the reason why this one was so exciting for me personally, is because it to me was just a logical progression of both of your guys' talent. It was very cool to see the progress, and I don't know everything behind the scenes, but I can tell you, at least externally speaking, it appeared as though there was a great collaboration and you both approached it with a tremendous amount of passion.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been really great meeting Rich, and we have worked really well together. He's so easygoing, and we have kind of same sense of humor, so that really helps. When there's lots of decisions to be made, and agonizing over the small things, it's good to be able to get on and have a laugh as well.
Yeah, so I mean, part of the reason this is so exciting for us is we haven't spoken yet with artists who did a collab. How did that start? Like, how did you all meet? How did you decide to do miniscapes and then decide to do another one? What was the genesis?
Well, from my perspective, it's quite interesting how we met actually, because I'd released like a static piece of work, and somebody had kind of copied it, and they released an fxhash project off the back of a piece of work I did, and I felt like it was more than inspired. It was kind of plagiarized. So I went into fxhash Discord to kind of moan about it and get some support. And I wasn't getting very far, to be honest. And I was feeling like banging my head against the wall. And then Rich kind of swooped in and said, "Hey, hang on a minute. No, this doesn't seem right." And we talked a little bit about it. It was great to get some support. And because plagiarizing is quite an issue in the space, and it's quite a challenge to kind of get any action on it. But Rich came along, and then we struck up a conversation. After that, he said, "I've seen your work. Do you want to do a collaboration?" I was like, "Yeah." I didn't even know Rich before, and it was just perfect. Really, just happened.
So yeah, I think just one of those really fortunate kind of coincidences actually. And then Miniscapes was born not long after that. It's only a couple of 3 weeks. I think just they said to it, if you're fancy doing something, love your work. I would encourage anyone to kind of go and dive back into kind of all of like the design and illustrative work that Rick's done before. Pick yourself up t-shirts. He's got some kick-ass t-shirts as well. And I just loved that work. I said, hey, I think doing a generative kind of take on something that lives in your head would be absolutely incredible. And I think the appeal for me is, particularly on fxhash, there's a lot of abstract work, and I'm guilty of that as well. But there's so much of it, and there's not as much sort of representational, sort of playful kind of charming. And I just thought, looking at Rick's work, I said, actually, this hasn't really been done, and so it hadn't been done well. And so the idea of being able to explore that was just fascinating. And as Rick said, we just hit it off. I think it was probably a while during the development of Acequia, we spoke to each other more than we spoke to our wives. It kind of felt like we were chatting basically every day. And Rick was busy doing like bathroom renovations and kitchen work, so we were chatting about that. And then remembering that, hold on, we're meant to be deciding what palettes we like, and so it's But by the time we left, it kind of felt like kind of almost like we'd gone from like I don't know. We then set up like a long distance relationship where we kind of didn't catch up as much. Quite strange.
Yeah, I mean, in any time you integrate more than one party, it's always tough to find that perfect chemistry. Like, what do you guys feel was the baseline to your chemistry? And to give a little bit of background for like P and I, we literally would just spend hours talking about drops before they happen. We'd be going through test outputs. It just, there's so much commonality and passion. It was like a friendship that had some natural tendencies. For you guys, like, how did you, after Rich stuck up for you, Rick, in the, I'll call it the fxhash Discord, like, how did you know? I'm just curious more than anything. Like, how did you know then that it was meant to be a collaboration?
Well, I looked at his work, obviously, after talking to him, and I thought he was doing something quite different and interesting, and there's a high level of quality there. And so I think that really came through. Working with people can be a challenge, and especially if you've got different ideas or different level standards, and we're both very meticulous, so it just worked really well. That we're both like attention to detail, and so that worked well together. But yeah, we soon after having a discussion on Discord, we just chatted on live Discord, and he's a nice guy. He's really friendly, and it just felt like he's your friend straight away. So the chemistry is good from the start, and he's very humble as well, which is great.
Yeah, I think we're just super lucky. I think as Rick touched on, we both have mild to moderate to severe kind of OCD issues, so that probably that helped. I think if you've got someone who's just kind of super keen to go, hey, let's get it out, people are buying, and then you've got someone else who's like, no, there's one pixel out of place, and instead it was pretty common. I actually went back through some of our Twitter chats, and there's literally like us bouncing back and forwards, like kind of like a zoomed in image of an output with like literally 1 or 2 pixels at a corner of one of the cubes like hanging off slightly. And we did the same through kind of miniscapes. We were kind of like, oh no, the kind of speed of the waves is just fractionally out. We need to kind of just change it a bit. So I think the fact that we both had that mindset kind of really, really helped. And I think, again, if you look at kind of Rick's kind of previous work, you can kind of see that everything's perfect. And that was probably the biggest challenge in Miniscape, actually, was try to kind of slowly kind of bring Rick around a little bit to kind of go, we can't put everything exactly where it needs to be, because otherwise it's not a generative project. So if you're used to doing kind of one-of-one kind of designs, that can be a challenge. But I think that was something that we actually, across both the projects, have kind of nailed really well. I think they actually kind of individually all feel they could be one-of-ones.
That was a real challenge for me, actually, from being very kind of static and not working with code and generative, like stepping across to like allow freedom in what's created. And it's been quite refreshing for me, but allowing more and more freedom rather than meticulously controlling every aspect. And I've quite enjoyed it, but it did take a little while to adjust.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you guys shedding light on the partnership and just some of the interworkings and dynamics. I think it's important, especially as we grow in Web3, to find that complement to everybody and their skill set, which is a great segue into, Rich, I am amazed at how many Discords and projects you've been able to amass in such a short amount of time. It seems like anytime I mention you in GM, you're there, or Grailers, you're there, or fxhash, you're there. It's pretty impressive. Do you mind shedding a little bit of light, and then we'll touch on Rick's journey, but on how you got to Web3 and maybe a highlight or two of your journey?
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of stumbled my way in by accident, which I think is probably common to a lot of people. So prior to kind of doing digital generative art, I was actually making kind of generative plotter art and just selling that largely kind of locally at sort of galleries and shows. And I was actually following a couple of people, actually Dan Cat and Greweb, who are both plotter geniuses, like crazy good at that stuff. And Greweb had actually done a project on ETH block art. So for anybody who doesn't know that, it's kind of similar, kind of like QQL model, but kind of predates it. So the idea being that you kind of create a project, and then people can actually kind of customize and tune anything from sliders to colors, and actually then kind of mint their own output. And so I stumbled into that just by complete fluke, to be honest, just off the back of kind of like seeing Greweb's work. And yeah, after doing a project there, then released Tohar on gen.art, which is probably the sort of breakout project as much as kind of things kind of can be in this space. And then since then, I've done some more work through them, some more through GM, and then quite a lot of work through fxhash, which is probably where I've concentrated most recently. I just enjoy the vibe on fxhash. I think just that kind of freedom, just to kind of go, hey, I want to do something. It's ready. Cool. It can be released tomorrow. I think the ability to kind of explore kind of unusual things that might not necessarily get picked up by the bigger kind of platforms is really liberating. So yeah, I mean, I tried to be across lots of things. I was involved in gmdao really early. So from sort of like day one, so I'd actually met Cypher, who heads up that DAO over in East Block Art. So that's how we got talking, and then donate some artwork for the tokens, and then cross Grailers, Tender. So yeah, as I mentioned when we were talking kind of a bit earlier offline, I do need to try and kind of get that balance probably slightly better. I probably spend too much time kind of across all of those things chatting to people, and not quite enough time actually working on art and collaborations at the moment. But yeah, watch this space to see if I achieve that goal.
Yeah, and Rick, how did you find your way into Web3?
Yeah, so yeah, it's fine. It's kind of weird when you're not in it. It's like some underworld that you just don't know about, and then you step your toes in, and suddenly, boom, your whole life has completely changed. And that's kind of how it was for me. I used to do a lot of t-shirt design, have stores online where I sell art prints and stuff like that. And I won some competitions, and I won quite a big competition with Threadless. And so I put a little bit into crypto. And so that sort of started getting me into this world. And then and then I just thought, oh, what's this NFT business all about? And the first port of call for me was Hen. And when I first looked at the site, I was just like, what is this? I do not get it. But I was just really excited to explore something new. I really enjoy community, and I used to be quite immersed in the t-shirt competition community. And as social media came about, that kind of dissipated a bit, and more people were talking online. So that's been amazing for me. I was just excited to jump into a new community, and the Tezos community is fantastic. It's just so supportive, so creative. And I was just, I never looked back from there really. And I just started minting straight away on Hen. I dipped a little bit into ETH, but.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I'm glad you found it. And, we normally think of this as being a lot of generative artists on Hen and kind of the fxhash community. And I'm curious, when you're not doing generative art, now that you are, it sounds like almost full-time, at least artistically focused on Web3, what kind of stuff are you making, and where are you putting it out?
Oh, what, from an NFT perspective, or?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty immersed in Tezos, so I do my own sort of static pieces. I sometimes collaborate with animators. Lewis Osborne, I've done a lot of work with him. He's an amazing animator. You should check him out. And I've just got I've started my first collection on Object as well. So just been building on that really. I've done some drops on OpenSea and Foundation as well. So
awesome. We'll link to all that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But my first experience of generative art is with Rich, and it's been amazing. It's really exciting.
You were talking about communities a lot, and actually I have a question for you on this, Rich, because you're one of the generative artists that we've noticed that you have a drop on gen.art, you got a drop with gmdao, you have drops on fxhash. I really like that you've gone and done releases with these different communities, and I'm curious to hear maybe your take, maybe perhaps for artists who have stuck maybe just to like art blocks or fxhash. What would you say to encourage them to try drops in different communities? Or maybe you wouldn't, but I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, don't do it. I think for me, the reason actually with gen.art that I kind of went there initially is that I love how they did and how they still actually do fewer releases. I think they do a fantastic job around actually kind of telling the story of the art, story of the artist. They do video interviews, everything around the site was really well put together, and that really appealed to me. Kind of actually having a good run up of time before a project, the project itself, and then some time afterwards to kind of actually absorb it and discuss it. GM Studio do a really kind of similar thing, so kind of staggering drops every 4 to 6 weeks. at the same time, art blocks is art blocks. In terms of kind of like the brand that's kind of out there. I think you'd find very few people who would kind of disagree that it is the leader, and if you want to kind of get that kind of that gold kind of cup of kind of like art kudos, then getting an AB curated drop is kind of where it's at. For me, it's probably something, hindsight, you might go back and make different choices. I think I kept thinking, right, I don't want to submit anything to Artbox until I've kind of got what is going to be my kind of best ever project I think I'd ever do. So I kept kind of putting that off. And a few people have said, oh, you should have just kind of, just submit something and kind of get it in there. They might tell you it's rubbish, or they might decide they like it. I enjoy the different mix of communities. I think fxhash, I think, as kind of Rick mentioned, I think is probably the kind of the freest, where you kind of anything kind of goes in some respects. I think that open nature tends to kind of bring more experimentation, and so I really love that. Equally, I think what Tender has done on top of fxhash has been kind of really valuable, because the downside of an open platform is anybody can release anything at any point, and so they do. So if you're coming in and you're quite time constrained, it can be really hard to kind of go, right, cool, what's the stuff I should actually look at? Where are the kind of the interesting kind of projects? So I think that's the downside, and Tender kind of was trying to kind of solve that. But yeah, I really encourage people just to kind of move around, find your tribe or multiple tribes. I really love I think the vibe in Tender Discord is great. I think the vibe in Graylers is great. The vibe in GM, and actually there's quite a difference. Some people are more focused on the speculation. Other people are more about the kind of the long term, wanting to kind of accrue, grails. And other people are just here because they're artists, and it's a great way to kind of chat and connect with people. So yeah, I really enjoy that part. But I think particularly if you're working on art the whole time, it can be quite a lonely existence. It's you, a keyboard, and a screen. So actually being involved in these communities is a good way to still get a bit of that kind of social kind of engagement and interaction.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it's easy to kind of get stuck in one group. And I imagine having that cross-pollination helps in a lot of ways, finding collaborators, finding friends, and also building a broader collector base, which I think is important. And I just wanted to ask you, perhaps Rich, you could go first, and then Rick, for artists out there who are thinking about doing collaborations, what advice would you have for them now that you all have done 2 projects successfully together? How would you recommend they think about it?
I think the key part, I think Rick mentioned it, find somebody you get on with. So ignoring the kind of the art and the kind of who brings what skills, it's find someone who you can get on with, because you're always going to have times where you have to make kind of difficult choices, or you have a difference of opinion. And if you fundamentally like each other, that's much easier than kind of coming at it from right, we're trying to find the best outcome, we're not trying to have an argument. And those can be kind of quite kind of different mindsets. If you're coming in going, I'm right, and what I want to do is to prove to you I'm right, that's very different to coming in going, I think I'm right, but what I really want is the best outcome for the project. And I think that was something that we tapped into kind of really early on. I think we're probably quite fortunate that because Rick was coming in, predominantly doing design, I was coming in doing code. I think if you have 2 people who are both trying to do the code, that would be a trickier kind of balance. So I think we're maybe quite fortunate kind of there, that we weren't trying to kind of try and do sort of pair programming and that kind of stuff. But I think fundamentally somebody you get on with, and I think someone, as Rick would have said, someone who's got the same kind of level of kind of quality that they're kind of striving for. So if you're both just trying to go, hey, we just want to get cool stuff out as quick as possible, that's cool. No worries. As long as you're both on the same page there, then you're going to have a good time.
Real quick, before we transition into the project, I just have to say, Rick, your People of Tezos piece is extremely on brand with today's image. You got the beanie, the goatee. I was looking at it while scrolling through your work, and I'm just like, man, this thing is spot on. For anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of checking it out, go check it out, man. It is super on brand.
Yeah, you don't catch me very often without my beanie on, to be honest. Thanks.
You know what? We can even show that. And as I'm showing that, just anything you want to add to what Rich said in terms of collaborations, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rich has pretty much covered it. You know, for me, it's like sense of humor. You know, different cultures, different people, they have different levels of humor. I'm in quite a lot of Twitter groups, and there's just one group that I'm chatting every day because we just have such a laugh, and it's really important. You know, this space is quite demanding and quite exhausting at times. You know, always trying to sort of stay on top of the wave, and you've got to have a sense of humor, got to have a laugh. So, and like Rich said, we were very fortunate. In fact, we had two very separate skill sets that come together perfectly. So,
fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that because I think it'll be important for other artists as they see the success you've had, both as a collaboration, but also the art you've produced. And with that, we should go ahead and transition over into Acequia. I'm gonna keep trying.
Acequia.
Oh my God, Acequia. I literally need to look at it to say it.
This is something sorry, I was just going to say this is something me and Rich debated about quite a lot, because the name, you know, it's like all these decisions you have to make. The name was like, are you sure? People are just going to pronounce it wrong. But hey, it was very, very relevant to the subject.
Yeah, we did try. The pronunciation is actually in the project description, but that probably gives you a hint that nobody reads them. So, we put it as the very first thing, and we joked, it's like, people are still going to butcher this. They're still not going to see it.
It's funny. In anticipation of the podcast, I literally pronounced it or tried probably 24 times. But since P and I are both engineers at heart, and it's kind of like a running joke, at least internally, about the podcast, just phonetically. I feel like I have a third grader comprehension. So even though you guys did everything to try to help us out, we still reserve the right to butcher it.
Yeah, we've heard some funny ones. Acequia, so lots. Acequia is. Yeah, we tried. It suited the project so perfectly. We're kind of like, no, we'll go with it regardless, and just brave the pronunciation.
And I love it. Like I love the aqueducts, right? I love the Arabic. I even love the fact that, you know, it's a Spanish word, but there's Arabic influence and it goes like way back. There's actually a lot of Arabic influence words in Spanish. So I love all of it. You know what it is though? It's like we love this collection. We've been talking about it for months and we've been pronouncing it wrong for months. So I've pronounced it incorrectly like 500 times. I'm only now learning how to pronounce it correctly. So it's our fault. But wanted to just give a little bit of a quick background on the project for folks. And so this was launched on November 1st, 2022. For people who may not be aware of it, it was launched on fxhash. It was a 343-piece collection, Dutch auction, started at 216, got down to 64 ether, but it really struck a nerve with the community and the crowd. I mean, very quickly, I remember people were talking about it in Grailer's Discord and other places. And I mean, if you scroll through here, I just like, so Jared and I have a framework for collections that we want to dive deeply into. And I'll just run through this really quickly. It's aesthetics, and then I'll give Jared a chance to talk about what he likes about this collection. But the first one is the aesthetics. And I just really, really love in my mind, what was kind of the juxtaposition of these really clean, beautiful designs, which makes a lot of sense to your background, Rick, excuse me. But also mixed with physics. So when you know, for folks who are watching, and if you're only listening, definitely take a look on fxhash. So this is number 19 here, and you see the water coming down, and it, you know, really abides by physical rules, and the animation is so cool. And there's something just kind of precise and almost engineering-like about it, but also still so aesthetically pleasing. And that juxtaposition just really tickles my brain, and it's part of the reasons why I love this project and was happy to collect it. So number one, aesthetics. So love that part of it. Secondly, the artists. I mean, Rich, we've been following your work for a long time. And Rick, we're familiar with Miniscapes, which is, again, just really clean, really well done. So we love you as artists. Holders. I mean, we have some of the top holders here who have this collection. I mean, Lemon 2D, DeFi Staker, who's a friend, and Toth. I mean, a lot of people that we really respect who are looking on the fxhash side. And I'm sure there are others I'm forgetting. Like I wouldn't be surprised if On Mises has one. Jared, you may know about that. Rich Poole Just kidding. We know you're the artist, but also, Rich, I got to tell you, you're a fantastic collector. So when I see you holding something, it's something I take note of. A project that's not yours. So that certainly factors into it. And then the sentiment. I mean, people were like, this is one of those collections. I don't know if you guys are aware, but some people are like, oh yeah, I got into gen art because of Acequia, right? Like literally, it brought people into gen art because of the way it just hit. And then we look at collection breadth, right? When we're talking about generative art, it's the algorithm we consider to be the art, not necessarily the individual outputs. And I mean, as I'm scrolling through here, there's just really cool variety that we'll dive into. And then we talk about historic significance. Was there something that was unique about this collection that could be copied? It's too early to say, only being about 3 months out, but I really think that there's something here with these animations and then like following physical rules that I just love. I don't know, and perhaps I'm like an engineering nerd. I like the idea of like creating these water pathways, whatever. And then the last thing is price action. So I'll hold on that one and give Jared a chance to go before we look at some of those charts. But yeah, Jared, anything you want to say about the collection as a whole?
Similar sentiment. I've been a collector of rich from basically my beginning journeys of fxhash. I've really enjoyed everything. Huge fan of it, but this one, it struck me right from the beginning for everything that P talked about. It was just absolutely enticing. It was engaging, and there's a buzz about it, and the variety was, I'll call it, vast enough to and the palettes were varied enough to really engage the collector. So, and then from a price action standpoint, I mean, I feel like it's like a crypto meme. It's up only, right? I mean, this thing has just been like an absolute rocket right out the gate, and it's been holding steady. So, kudos to both of you for creating quite what I would go out on a limb to say for a timeless piece. This is honestly very beautiful, and the more you look at it, the more it's just captivating.
Yes, 100% well said. And here's the floor price chart. As Jared said, rocketed it up. This was in the middle of a horrendous bear market. Let's keep that in mind. And the median price here shows you quite a bit. So even though the floor has dipped a little bit in recent times here, the median listing has not. So what that tells you is there's a few people who maybe are looking for liquidity, but on the whole, people are holding. And if you look at number of items listed, it's been pretty flat there for some time. So just some of the stats that we like to share with the listeners. And before we kind of go through all the traits, love to hear maybe Rick and then Rich, or whatever order you guys would like to go in, just a little bit about the history of the collection. So, you guys decided, all right, we're going to do another collaboration. How did you come up with this concept, and how did you, eventually end up with this output?
So after Miniscapes, we'd had such a good fun time, and it was well received, and we just quite quickly said, let's do another collaboration. And it kind of started where I'd not really done much isometric drawing, but I did a isometric illustration, and it's going to originally be a collaboration with someone else. And that never came through. And I showed it to Rich, and I said, what do you think about this? Could you do something like this with generative art? And he's like, yeah, maybe. And it kind of just snowballed from there. And we were quite organic in the way that it evolved. We didn't really we had that image as a guide, but it kind of evolved. We had lots of ideas along the way, things we got rid of, things we kept, so we just wanted something that was distinctive in its own right, stood apart from Miniscapes, but it still, had some sort of brand consistency throughout. And I think sort of quirky, charming. It really just came together, actually. And the amazing thing about it is over the course of 5 months, I felt quite confident about the project because I never really got tired of it. I mean, there was many days where we were looking at static outputs, testing, and then I'd go back and watch an animated one, and I'd be like, wow, that's looks really cool. So I never really got tired, so I felt confident. But when it came to actually launch, the response was completely unexpected.
This is a kind of a personal fascination I have, but with every artist, I love asking the question, how many test outputs do you think you went through during I mean, you mentioned earlier, you guys are borderline OCD, which I have a great respect for. So I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to extreme, where do you fall on how many test outputs you think you viewed?
I would be surprised if we cleared 100,000 by the time we were done, because we had a lot of times where we'd run like, I would try and be kind to Rick, so I'd try and kind of like quite often kind of go, right, I've done a batch of like a few hundred, but quite often I'd have kind of gone through thousands, because as Rick said, the whole kind of project evolved really organically. He sent me the kind of initial kind of one he'd done before, and I was like, okay, that's really pretty cool. And actually, similar to yourself at PJ, I come from an engineering background, and I think what struck me with this is it's got the charm that Miniscapes had, but it's got this really appealing kind of just geometric kind of like influence over it. And I was like, I could see people just like having this on their wall as a piece of art in any room, and just people being drawn to it because it's so fascinating. And actually, when we first started, the water actually wasn't there day one. So the water was something that I'm glad I suggested you do this animated water, and at the time had no idea how much time it would take. So it's the whole kind of development process, probably 70-80% was going, okay, right, cool, how's this water actually going to fill up cool in the real world? Then how would that translate to an isometric world? Right, then how do I convert that into code? And even silly stuff like when it drops over an edge, you have to kind of do this little kind of like highlight, because if you don't have that in, the whole thing looks super flat. But then sometimes as one of the cubes fills up, that highlight disappears, because once the water's now flowing flat, not going down and across. So there's all this stuff, and then when you put the highlight in, it overdrew, so you have to draw back over the cubes to kind of not have these edges. So there's a real kind of journey all the way through. As Rick mentioned, so many things that we tried and threw out. Probably over 100 pallets that at some point were in and then got ditched. But we had crazy ideas, from like doing skylines, doing islands, all these things that we tried, and ultimately just didn't feel like they sat within the collection. It kind of felt that we'd be putting them in for the sake of having a rare thing, not because it actually added to it overall. And I think that's really the part of the collection I'm most proud of. I feel it's kind of holds together as just a wonderful kind of cohesive collection, but we got the supply versus the kind of variety spot on, so that each piece individually still feels special and you're kind of happy to own it. And I think that was something that we agonized over a lot in terms of what to do in terms of supply.
Thank you for sharing. We always try to tease out some of these hidden or inherently, I'll call it deep feelings from your guys' journey. So thank you for sharing that. That was actually really, really cool to hear. I have one last question before we transition into trades. Rick, I'm looking at your mental blocks 05 on object. Did this front run the project, or was this a result of the outputs? I'm just curious. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but
yeah, no,
the similarities.
Straight after I kind of cooled down from the complete hype of the Acequia being launched, I thought, right, what am I going to do next now? So I started my own collection, and I just created that particular one is a tribute to the project. I just thought it might be fun to, hark back to it, and that project's kind of the blocks, I kind of start with a blank page, and I just let it evolve, and I just draw and I see what happens. And sometimes I might have an idea of a theme in mind. But yeah, I just thought it'd be cool to do one that is kind of like a Acequia. So that's
we'll let the listenership vote on which of the mental blocks should be the baseline for your guys' next collab. How about that? That will be the listenership poll. And I say that because I'm always fascinated with, maybe somebody who doesn't have the means to jump into this project, because it does have a high floor relative in TES. I mean, mental blocks 05 is, there's an offer to sell at 500 TES, so it presents a really good way to get exposure. And especially part of what we try to do is bring light to everybody's projects. I especially like Matt Delorier has some stuff hidden on Tez that were almost like precursors to subscapes and Meridian. So I'm always curious to see which one is first, the chicken or the egg.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. And I just sorry to interject here, but I love this one, Rick. Like when I was a little kid, I used to play snakes and ladders, and this is just like it's amazing how you can bring up those feelings with some of this art. And to Jared's point about your prior art and building upon different techniques, like was there, Rich, you mentioned the isometric shapes within Acequia. Were there specific techniques that you all had worked on together that you were saying, hey, let's push it? Like, was it the isometrics to say, okay, we did this with miniscapes, and for folks who haven't seen it, like here's miniscapes on the screen. But well, I guess it was somewhat some isometrics for sure here. But yeah, how did you think about the next iteration? Were you trying to evolve on this aesthetic, or were you just trying to do something different?
I think what we're aiming for, I think what Miniscapes has is just bundles of charm. It is just like overflowing with kind of charm, and what I think Rick set out to kind of do, was how much can you convey with as little as possible? And I think Miniscapes absolutely kind of does that. I think with Acequia, I remember kind of I think chatting with Rick kind of quite early, said it'd be great if we could have something that kind of pulled most of the charm of Miniscapes, but then also kind of pulled in a kind of like sort of more kind of serious quote unquote kind of kind of art as well. So for people who kind of go, oh, I don't like charming art, can be a bit kind of whimsical, it's not a cup of tea. It's like, cool, let's see if we can kind of actually kind of bring those together. So you have art that really kind of elicits emotion and that you really enjoy, but you can also kind of aesthetically appreciate as someone who might come from an engineering background or kind of sort of technical background as well. And I think we set out and I think achieved that really well. Doing the whole isometric thing, that was a new thing for me. So I actually did an fxhash or fxtext article about Acequia that I wrote in, I want to say December, up in November, December, that actually dives into kind of some of the sort of inner workings, I suppose, including talking a bit about how that water plumbing system works, because the water doesn't actually flow through the piece. Each kind of cube has its own kind of state in terms of kind of being aware of how much water it has, but actually it doesn't have any awareness of what the kind of the cube prior to it did. So this kind of dives in a bit to from early kind of how does an isometric kind of cube get formed, what's the kind of maths behind it, through to kind of some of the stuff that we had to tackle along the way.
I'm sorry, I love this stuff. Did you have to pick up any math? Did you have to crack open some of the math textbooks to figure it out?
So I pretty unsurprisingly, I was a complete nerd at school. So I won the maths prize like 10 years in a row. But I hadn't, within generative art, you don't actually do maths as often as maybe some people think. Most of it is actually kind of working on the ideas and then actually kind of tuning the heck out of. Whereas with this, there was a vast amount of kind of vector math that had to be done for all of the water pathing. So I did, fairly regularly said to Rick in the midst of like the low part for me, where I was just kind of each day was just like, cool, right, create some more water paths, that I would be glad never to have to see a vector notation again. And so it did have like quite often. There's a few parts where I'd done a load of the code one way, and then I was like, I'm writing out the same stuff each time. So I actually converted everything to like a kind of almost like a compass-based system. So I thought of each of the hexes as having like a north, northeast, northwest. So that was a pretty extensive rewrite, but then made it much easier in my head, because otherwise I was trying to kind of keep track of 4 or 5 different sets of numbers and weird ratios everywhere. So again, part of this article does kind of talk a bit around that and how that kind of helped, and also dives into kind of how stuff like the water pathing kind of works and that type of stuff as well. So if anyone's do have a read, I think it's relatively interesting to kind of understand a bit more as to kind of how we had to solve some of those problems along the way.
I mean, this is amazing. I really appreciate you writing this, and we'll link to this in the show notes. It's just really cool I think for the audience to see what went into it and show off, show off some of those math skills, right? Like you might have gotten, you might not have been popular for it growing up, but certainly
it wasn't great. It wasn't one of those kind of like, hey, I wish I was him situations. But I love talking about projects and sharing it, because I think for a lot of people, I've always kind of said, rightly or not, that I think the hardest part within generative art is actually the initial idea. It's actually having something that's genuinely kind of interesting that you can kind of dive into and make a long form collection out of. If you've got a really solid idea, the coding sometimes is like, if you hit your head against a wall long enough, you will eventually kind of get there and be able to release that project. But if you have a bad idea, you're going to struggle to make anything good out of it. So I think sharing stuff like this so that people can kind of see how it works maybe demystifies it a bit. And so, to kind of go, if you've got a really cool idea, don't be scared of actually having a crack at it or finding someone else. Most generative artists, we're really pretty friendly people. So, reach out, get in touch with people and say, here's my idea. Can you help? Can you point me somewhere? We tend to, be pretty forthcoming.
Well, if you get tired of hexagons, my vote is for Mental Blocks 09, the cityscape version. I'm a civil engineer by schooling, so that's my next vote.
Yeah, we've badged a couple of things, but yeah, no spoilers at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's dive into, I said Acequia. I'm gonna keep saying it properly until it is in my mind. Let's talk about some of the different categories here. So for folks who are only listening, we're now in fxhash. You go to the project page, scroll down, there's a little filter button here, and it shows the different features. And maybe we can just go ahead and start with alignment, and I'll let you talk through it, and I'll sort of share what you are saying on the screen, and you tell me if you want me to click on something different.
Yeah, so initially when we were developing the project, we had no parameters at all, and so all the cubes, the designs that we came up with, they just kind of dropped in wherever they wanted. It was kind of random, and we worked with that for a long time. So literally the outputs could be any mixture of cubes, any number of water puffs, whatever, and we slowly sort of honed that down, and then we started creating kind of almost grouping. And this is where, Rich lost his mind many times trying to get the vector maths right with the water, but we also kind of lost our minds a bit sometimes trying to group to create different aesthetics. So, and one of the more obvious ways to tell is with the alignment. So some of them, you'll see they're all facing one way. Some are kind of valleying in together or on a ridge. And it created, when Rich first put it to me, I was like, wow, that's really cool. I love that, because initially everything was random. So it was really exciting to start seeing how we could manipulate the code to create different kind of shapes, and sometimes reflecting like a mountain ridge or a cityscape like Gondor or something, So I'll let Rich talk a bit about that too.
Yeah, so yeah, as Rick said, I was just bringing up some conversations we'd had, which in hindsight read like absolute kind of gibberish. And this was particularly in relation to kind of us looking at the locations, which sometimes are kind of tied to the alignment. But yeah, we've got either W or X should be included with most. Then if neither K or N, include one set from Z, but V goes best with W and X goes best with Y. So we've got this huge kind of array of kind of different cubes that we built out. And what we actually started to do is to sort of almost build out kind of sort of like little small kind of like kind of families of cubes. So when we then came to look at doing things like the location, we then started to kind of pull in kind of like sometimes one of those groups, sometimes two, sometimes three. And in the case of the alignment, what you'll see is if you go onto the reflection, there's only actually a couple of the locations that use this because it's quite a strong effect. So if you've got the reflection on there, it tends to sort of dominate the kind of your kind of instant sort of visual recognition of the piece. So we have sort of basically kind of three variants. So you've got a kind of a valley, so where kind of the reflection is about the midpoint kind of vertically. but then everything's kind of sloping in. And then on the right hand side there, you've got the opposite where you've got this kind of reflection, everything kind of comes up. So you're kind of always looking at like this kind of like sort of pitched kind of mountainside. And then in the middle, you've got this kind of mirrored one. So that actually kind of came in quite late. And as happened quite often, like one of us would have like an idea, and we basically have to pitch it to each other to kind of go, hey, here's my idea. Is this too strange? I love it because I've had the idea, but is it too weird? So I think that mirroring was kind of one that I think when I first pitched it to Rick, he was like, I'm not sure. And then I think it kind of grew on him. And maybe like wine or mold, I'm not sure, but it kind of like, it kind of made it in there. And then, yeah, so within the alignment, you then got random, which kind of does what it says on the tin. So at that point, what we're saying is kind of each of the kind of the cubes could be basically pointing kind of left or right. And the way that's done, just from a kind of math point of view, it literally just kind of mirrors effectively around like the midpoint of the cube. And then within the fixed one, in that scenario, you've then got kind of all of them being perfectly aligned. So that's where you get this kind of lovely kind of sweeping sort of mountainside. And I remember actually when we first started playing with that, how we were kind of just like struck by kind of going, wow, okay, that mountain kind of village vibe that we wanted, here it was sort of, jumping out at us.
Yeah, this is super cool. And for everybody who is watching or listening, you can tell the fixed because all the stairs are going in the same direction. So it's relatively easy to see. And I love this reflection one, Rich, and I love how some of them are mirrored in the middle. This is essentially a hidden feature, which we as collectors love because there are 3 variants of the reflection. And just as a little Easter egg, do you happen to know which is the most rare, whether the valley, the mountain, or the mirror, as you call them?
I think in theory the switchback kind of one, so where it's kind of like horizontally cut, should be the rarest if random number generators have done their thing. So this is something me and Rick often chatting about, is that you can set how rare you want things to be, but with only 343, you are rolling a lot of dice. But yeah, so in theory, at least, that kind of switchback, I think, would be the rarest. We toyed a lot. We spent a lot of time agonizing over like relative rarities, because there's sometimes a trap you could fall into where you make the coolest outputs the rarest, and you're like, if you've got stuff that's really good, really cool, make that the center of the collection. Don't put it at the outside, because you then have these kind of super hyper grails that there's only 2 or 3 of, and then everyone else is left kind of looking up going, oh, I want one of them. So we tried to balance that so that the rare stuff felt that it belonged with the collection, and it's always going to have a bit more value because people like rare things, but it wasn't a kind of like, wow, these are so much better than everything else, why did you even bother to do the rest?
Yeah, it's a tough balance. As an artist, as a collector, you love to have one of those pieces, but then when you don't have it, you're like, damn, I want one. It reminds me of like Bauhaus by Thomas Lynn Peterson on screens. Like, it's one of the most popular palettes, but yet it carries one of the largest premiums because it's just so good the way it came together. So I think you guys did a really good job balancing this. And then
I think what's quite interesting is you don't know what's going to be what everyone's going to want either. You just don't know. So you could think that, oh, this should be rare, or this should be what everyone wants, and then you launch it in a completely different scenario. I mean, when we talk about scale, I was quite surprised that the ones which people started paying a premium for and jumping over each other for. So it's always a shock. You can't really guess these things.
That's a good point, right? You got to let the market speak, and then you just got to put out your best art. I have to say though, the fixed alignment it reminds me almost of the archetypes that have like that very predictable and repeatable pattern. So when you look at it, it just looks like familiar over and over again. So I'm definitely drawn to the fixed from the alignment. But whereas the alignment's a little bit more obvious, can you tell me a little bit more about the climate? I'm not as I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on that.
Well, yeah, okay. So when we started building out without any water, and then we started making the water work, and then we had to sort of deliberate about how much should have water, or should any not have water, because the water is such an amazing feature. Do you want to include it in all of them? But in the end, we sort of tried to get the balance right. And so tropical basically means there's a lot of water paths. Temperate is kind of hitting in the middle, and then dry is where there's no water channels at all.
I feel like I should have been able to figure that one out, but now it makes perfect sense.
I know. I feel like a dunce cap. It should be put on me all of a sudden. But congrats.
Yeah, so I mean that it does also scale a bit. So the idea is that on the larger outputs, you kind of will naturally get kind of like more water, so that it doesn't kind of just feel a bit kind of barren and sad. There is within the dry, there's quite a cool output. So if you're looking for kind of like just like hidden kind of grails, there's one in there with the CMYK palette. So it's the only output that basically has no kind of color. Effectively, it's just this pure mono output. And so when we were actually, there you go, when we were running test outputs, when we first kind of got those, like, is this going to feel bad? Because like the whole point of CMYK is it's got the ink. And I was like, actually, no, I love that. It's just got this just complete purity about it. So it was really cool to have literally just one of those come up. That's kind of the ideal. Really.
Yeah, that one made my top 3 favorites. It's one of my favorite palettes in the group, and then just the fact that like that prominence of the colors for the water, and then you have a dry version of it. It's so it pops differently, and it's so counterintuitive to the way I think the palette was intended. It's definitely one of my favorites in the collection. It's cool that you pointed that out.
And I gotta say, like, there's something about this collection. I mean, when I look at this output, it's like, I want to live there. And I know that sounds weird, but it just seems like it would be such a cool place, wake up every morning on my purple mountain. And I don't know. There's something about it that really draws me in. And sorry, I know that was a completely random comment, but I wanted to express that too, because I thought you guys would appreciate it.
No, I mean, I kind of get. I think they'd be quite trippy places to live, but what the lights. I really love the lights, the night ones with the electric lights, because they do really feel like someone's home, and they have a bit of life to them. Obviously the water animating brings life to it, but the little lights as well makes you feel like there's people living there, and you wonder who they are. Yeah,
I initially was thinking hobbits, and for some reason it brings up a lot of these ideas too, but. Let's talk about location, because you all picked, first of all, the names of these are really interesting and unique. And I don't know if Granada is the only one I recognize here, to be honest. I don't know how many of these are made up places, but how do those like create a visual variance here? Or is that more of like a metadata trait that doesn't show up visually? Would love to hear you talk through this.
Yeah, Rich, do you want to talk about the grouping side of it, and I'll talk about the origin of the names, if you like?
Yeah, sounds good. So when we were talking about how we kind of made these kind of like sort of little families of kind of cubes, and then started kind of pairing, or in some cases 3 or 4 or 5 sets of those families, the location is actually what drives that. So if, for example, I was going to pick my favorite one, but I won't, because that one's actually slightly different. If for example, you pick out, say, Camaras, so just down a few more. So this is really one of my favorites, because this is actually harks back to some of the earliest kind of work that we were doing on this. So it's literally just got slopes, stairs, it's got, some kind of windows and doors, but the whole feel is actually kind of sort of like fairly kind of clean and minimal. You still get some of the clusters and the occasional kind of little tower in there. Whereas if you hop into, say, Travella's, which is up towards the top, third one down there. And in this one, so in this case, the location is what's actually then driving that reflection as well. So in this, you get the kind of reflection, but then you get a different type of door and window. So in this case, we've kind of got the kind of like recessed. So you really get that sense of like kind of like sinking and disappearing into the mountainside. So that's what the location actually kind of, under the hood, in terms of kind of like what it means from a code perspective. That's how we actually kind of made use of all these different kind of cubes that we'd built out. I should mention there's probably 20, 30 kind of different cube designs that kind of didn't make the cut in the end. At some point, we should probably do like a fun, just like, sort of just Rick and myself just like, pull up all of these things that we ditched out and just do like a kind of slightly rambly kind of segue through all the things we tried.
That would be really cool if you were able to like share with the community stuff that maybe got trashed at
We've
one
got
point.
there's so much. There's so I think at one point we had about 100 pallets, Rick, and then I was like, right, we need to start paring this down, and we we basically lived in Google Sheets for about 3 weeks, just like rating each of the pallets individually, and then having like okay, what do our other halves think? If we couldn't decide, okay, right, cool. I'll ask Amy, and what does she think? And, so we agonized over those pallets for so long, and probably like 4 or 5 sprints of trying to do it. So we didn't just go, right, we're done. We'd come back around. There's some really fun ones. Rick had a really cool idea. At one point we had these kind of pumps, and so they kind of move up and down. And he had the idea of doing like a NES palette. So we actually made the pumps red and a bit shorter. And then the rest of the output was grey. So it looked like little kind of controller buttons moving up and down. So there was a lot of like weird fun stuff we tried. And then as it went on, we're like, it's going to feel like we're trying a bit too hard to be kind of cool rather than actually making a kind of cohesive kind of collection. But it'd be great fun to kind of share some of that stuff.
I'm just saying, if you need me to sign an NDA, I'll preview anything you need. I'm here to support you.
Heck yeah. Cool. Rich, if you want to take over like the names, and maybe Hoothcar as well, which is one of my favorites, just as to where that comes from.
Oh yeah, of course. So I mean, the idea of Acequia, really, if you travel, I've done quite a lot of traveling in Portugal, France, and Spain. But in Spain, they have all these complex water systems and water channels that irrigate, because it's very arid in parts. They have all these water systems that bring water to individual farmers and individual fields at times, and they have these really complex ways in which the community organizes it, so everyone gets their fair share and everyone gets a certain time when they get their water. And I was just absolutely mesmerized by these, and they're beautiful. They open up the sluice gates, and in fact we thought about having sluice gates. We ditched that in the end, but and it just brings life to the land, and you hear the water and you see it flowing through all these open channels. It is fascinating, and that's the kind of idea behind the project. So we just felt it made sense to choose Spanish towns and villages for the different locations. And to be honest with you, I got a bit anal about this, and I was looking at all of the towns and the villages. A lot of these I've visited, and trying to sort of match themes or ideas behind them with the names, And the interesting thing was that how do you pronounce it? Is it Hugar or something like that?
Yeah, I think Hoothcar. I could be butchering it, so this could be an Acequia thing all over again.
Yeah. Well, but that was a village in Spain that they filmed the Smurf movie in, and all the houses were painted blue for the movie. And then they just kept it because it became a tourist attraction. And so we felt, well, this one is specifically for the blueprint output, and it's all blue. So it's just crazy rational reasons behind everything that no one's ever going to know unless they listen to this.
That's awesome. Having done business and traveled in Spain a lot, I can honestly say I don't recognize a lot of the names, but now I'm gonna have to go look at a map real quick. So thank you for sharing. And I'm sure all of our Spanish listenership is gonna have a even further tie to the project. This is pretty cool. And I'm not even gonna try to do the names because I'm horrible at English. I can't even try to go into my Spanish. The next trait is outline. This one seems fairly straightforward. Is there a very logical flow to this one? Maybe Rick, you can address that since you're kind of captain of the aesthetics.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Rich came up with a lot of crazy ideas, and because I'm so used to working, without the generative side, I'm quite particular about how everything is, and I take a little while to he was always sort of trying to convince me of this and that and sort of bend my arm, and he felt there really needed something else, and he sort of experimented with it, and I took a long time to come around to it, but it's been really popular, just changing the outline. So I think we originally had well, I'm talking about the inverted one. So we didn't have that originally, and he came up with that. But we had different thicknesses because we just felt it gave a slightly different aesthetic to the outputs, thin or bold, and then the inverted ones kind of changed the output altogether. So yeah, that one was one of Rich's many crazy ideas. That one made it.
Yes, victory. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think so. I hope maybe it'd be an interesting kind of like hark back to one of the things that we kind of adopted, I think about halfway through, was you'll notice on like nearly all of the palettes, the outline is the same color as like the darkest face of the cubes. And so initially we didn't actually have that. And what we found is by putting that in, it really kind of like pulled you into the piece and really kind of accentuated the sort of the depth of it. And so by mixing up the outline, it just kind of changed that feel quite a lot. We did at one point, we had, I think we called it like, I think I kept referring to like chunky lines. So, we dialed them up even more, almost to kind of sort of miniscape kind of levels. But at the higher scales, that didn't really work. And we actually had a couple of goes where I tried to convince Rick we could do some without an outline at all. And that ended up being quite trippy at times. So it lost a bit of the sense of place and became just kind of pure geometry, which every now and then worked and then other times didn't. But I really like the inverted are some of my kind of favorites, just because I think it's quite fascinating how, in this case, all we're doing is saying, right, don't use the darkest face of the outline. We're just grabbing one of the other colors. And I think it's just quite fascinating, how it just really changes your kind of perception of the piece by kind of breaking up the cubes more. So it just felt that it kind of sat within it without, I think it was one of the key things, like Rick's work is so kind of subtle in terms of some of the details. And I didn't want to kind of have stuff in here where I kind of thought, right, we're blowing the normal aesthetic so far out of the water just for the sake of, going, hey, look at what we could do. But still allowing ourselves that a bit of variation and kind of, exploration, that kind of felt like, it still kind of lived within the project.
Oh, I love these inverted ones too, Rich. And it's really interesting how something like the outline, which, it takes up a small amount of pixel space, let's call it, on the image, but it makes a big difference when you look at things. And, Jared talked about screens before. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and Rick can probably speak better than me on this, is that we found most interesting was that dark face color. We could change that just ever so slightly, kind of shifting that a bit towards brown or a bit towards blue, and it throws out all the other colors. You'd look at them side by side and you would swear that the other colors were different. And so, Rick in particular spent a lot of time. I called it, he had like this kind of sort of palette pyramid. So he had like a sort of like a test sort of set of cubes that he would kind of use for kind of designing out these palettes. And unfortunately, only really late on, but really, really late, probably in like a few weeks out, I made a little kind of P5GS thing where I could actually pick the colors and it would update basically a version of Rick's pyramid palette thing. And I was like, oh man, I should have done this like 2 weeks in because it would have made our lives way easier. But I think that was one of the parts I found most fascinating was, that outline and that kind of base shadow color, how just changing that ever so slightly, could really kind of just warm something up, throw it out. And I think it's something actually, in particular within fxhashes, that people maybe overlook the importance of palettes. I think sometimes you kind of, you tend to see a lot of the same palette you kind of recognize and go, I can see which website these have kind of come from. And they're great sometimes as a starting point, but I think I'd really encourage people to try and seek that kind of inspiration elsewhere. For a long time, anytime I went shopping with my wife and daughter, I was just taking photos of everything that I could, billboards, toys, anything looking, go back and try that, at home and kind of, see what works.
I'll have to send you some pictures. I have a dream of being a generative artist one day, and anytime my kids are playing with Play-Doh and they just have these like ridiculous colors come together, I'm like, oh my god, that's beautiful, and I'll take a picture.
Love it.
For sure. And I just want to really quickly point out because I hadn't even noticed this until we are doing this, like some of the detail here in the cubes, right? And I know this is probably some of the cities that you talked about, but how these cubes have this patterning on the top. And then down here, we have a different patterning on the top of some of these cubes. So I was just noticing that, so I thought I'd point that out. And Rick, were you about to say something?
Well, no, just that. I mean, the color, I think Rich lost his mind on vector maths and water paths, and I kind of lost my mind on colors, because it was amazing how you would just tweak it a little bit and it would start to look like another palette we've got, and so you try and hit that perfect spot every time. And, like Rich said, change the color of one face changes the look of the whole thing. So I really did labor over the palettes, and it's something I do sort of take a lot of pride in, is getting the colors right, because I think it's really important aspect of any piece of art, is, you don't want it clashing, or you got to get it just right. So yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about color.
Well, I will tell you, my friend, you nailed it. And that's a great transition to the next category, which is palette. And I thought perhaps you could talk about your process of narrowing it down. I mean, you have so many, so it's a little bit hard for me to imagine how many there were to begin with. And they're all beautiful. Like I really, I'm not just saying this, but I love the variety here. And then some of these are so cool. Like this graphite one is unreal and really creative. You have the blueprint one, and then this one here, where is it, monitor, which is kind of unique, but so cyberpunk. And I say unique because, we've seen blueprint palettes before, but I've never seen a palette like this. And you guys obviously nailed the blueprint as well. And perhaps, yeah, maybe you could talk about how you narrow those palettes, and maybe we could go around the horn, myself and Jared included, and just point out a couple palettes that we like for people watching.
Let's challenge them. We got to pick your favorite kid. You can only pick one.
We did have easily 100, I think, at one point, and Rich was even having a go, and his partner was suggesting some too, and we had so many in the mix, and we would go through a process of removing the ones that really didn't work. We had folders where we put ones that we loved, ones that were iffy, and ones that should go, and we just whittled it down. And I remember when we had about 100, Rich said, I really think we should get it down to about 20 or 30. And I nearly fell off my chair. I was like, really? It's like saying goodbye to all these palettes that you feel like you labored over and perfected. But we managed it in the end. I'm not sure how many there are in total now. I've forgotten, but yeah, it was quite a task whittling them down. And then of course, it's the naming as well, naming the palettes. That was another thing. But yeah, did you say my favorites?
Yeah, what's your favorite? If you can pick one. If you really can't, we'll give you two. I'll give you the out.
That is really tricky. I've had to think about it. I mean, I'm really happy with some of the quirky themed ones, like CMYK. It was instantly massively popular with people, and I just thought those bright, bold, coloured water coming out, it's just really fun. So I'm really proud of that one, and that one has become something people really wanted. I love the night palettes. I love the electric lights. So I'm quite a big fan of slate, actually. And this is where me and Rich, we did not argue. It was never a crossword, but we kind of fought it out to keep some that we might have created or that we were more we favoured. So slate managed to stand the test of time from the beginning, and I just love the sort of atmospheric kind of dark mood of it with the lights that really pop. So that's a personal favorite of mine. And I do really like graphite as well. I love the way it kind of stands out. You've got monitor, which is a similar sort of monotone almost, but I love this. It almost feels like the original design or the original drawings for it, and it's just stripped right back, but it still works. So yeah, those are probably my favorites.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Rich, which ones would you call out?
So Probably a sentimental kind of early favorite would be Twilight. And the reason for that is it's actually one of the kind of palettes we had super early on. And actually, it lived as like my phone background for probably about like 3 months. So every time I picked up my phone, I'd kind of get, this little kind of like smile of like, we're making something really cool. Because 3 months in, I still enjoyed looking at it. If I was just going to pick one, I'd probably pick Apollo. And the reason for that is, again, a sentimental one. A friend of mine, Ken Consumer, who runs the Arbitrarily Deterministic podcast, completely unbeknownst to him, he'd sent me a piece of art that he'd done himself. So he said, send it by post, which is always a bit fraught in terms of things getting here. And when it arrived, it was actually like a slightly kind of isometric kind of cube-based piece. And he had no idea that Rick and I were working on Acequia at this point in time. And so I actually did a tweet about this when I finally got my hands on a Acequia of my own. And I actually color picked from the piece that he sent and used that as the inspiration for Apollo. So I think that palette will always be a really it was just such a serendipity that I opened it and I just took it through to my wife and both just like laughing about how crazy it was that he with no background, no idea, had sent this piece that almost looked like it could be sort of Acequia kind of 0.0.1 kind of thing in terms of the evolution of the project.
That's awesome. I just love teasing out these stories on how things came to be, and I just love the personal connections along the way. It makes me smile from ear to ear. If I had to pick one, it's CMYK. I have to ask you, what does CMYK stand for, just out of curiosity?
So that's the basic printing colors: cyan, magenta, yellow, black. But black is K for some reason. So it's just kind of graphic design nerd stuff. And I mean, we had quite a few other things. We had RGB in there as well, but that didn't manage to make it to the final cut. And then monitor, it's like an original BBC Acorn screen or something. And so that's CMYK. Those are the basic, and the black and the white. So that's all you need to.
It may be basic to some, but I have to say the execution on this one is like one of a kind. I think it's probably one of the crowd favorites. It just pops. I'm a sucker for graphite, so that's the runner up for me. But this CMYK, it hits differently. I think it pops differently from the crowd. It's a very beautiful palette. Ridiculously well executed. Congrats.
Yeah, I second that. This was actually really hard for me to pick, even though I was the one springing it on people. And there's so many cool ones. Like, for example, this one, comic book, I wanted to highlight it because, the tops are different than the sides of the walls, and that feels like fairly unique. But the one that really jumped out to me was Oro Druin. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but I just, it's lava, right? I mean, at least in my mind, you have lava flowing, and that takes it to kind of like this fantasy level. Now I'm thinking like Lord of the Rings or something like that. And I just really enjoy that. And, I got to say, for both of you, the way that you made the fluid change color so it wasn't always water and kept it in theme was brilliant. I mean, I know it seems like a small thing, but it really resonated with me. And so that's why I wanted to point out that palette. And my backup is also the Twilight. I'll admit, Rick, I remember you noting in the Graylers Discord that Rich, that you like the Twilight palette. And I just love blue. And you somehow created you created fantastic variety in the colors and the shading, all with what are probably blues that are really similar to each other. And then the orange light is just the cherry on the cake. The blue and the orange mix is, I think, fantastically executed here. So had to highlight that one because I love both of them a lot. Let's talk about size. I mean, this one is fairly obvious to most people sorting through here. Maybe you guys could talk about how you thought about sizes and if you have personal favorites within this.
Yeah, cool. I'll have a first crack. So we actually, again, kind of explored quite far outside even the bounds of kind of where we ended. So there's actually, I think I posted on Twitter a print that I did of one that was kind of even sort of micro goes to, I think it's like sort of 20 or so kind of hexes across. There was one that we did that I think it was about 30 or 40, which printed looks incredible. On screen is just like a haze of almost pixel size kind of cubes. So I think we were super mindful of kind of going, most people when they're kind of looking through the collection are going to be looking at like this. So if we went any kind of smaller in terms of individual cube size, it's just going to get lost. And equally, we initially had kind of like some that were closer to micro. But I think as Rick kind of pointed out that the challenge was you didn't get a real kind of clear jump. So we kind of made sure to kind of keep micro really quite far removed from sort of small and compact. So it's a real noticeable difference. And then the other end with kind of epic, we did at one point again kind of try getting even closer. But what it meant was your water path was really pretty constrained because it had nowhere really to go other than just kind of like straight and then finish. So it meant that some of the outputs could end up feeling like, just basically the same. But we wanted to keep it in because I really enjoy these. I think kind of printed, I printed a couple of sort of the test outputs that kind of this scale and printed out like sort of 20 by 30 inches. They're just really kind of incredible sort of statement pieces you can kind of hang up. And yeah, I think we agonized quite a while again on the balance of this one, but I think we kind of settled on like a fairly sort of like normal sort of bell curve distribution. We all, for the most part, kind of I think sort of enjoyed the sort of standard and sort of compact. So these are probably the sweet spot, but wanted to kind of sort of push out a little bit from that as well.
Yeah, I think for the algorithm, you had hearing that it's bell curve, it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a really, really beautiful distribution across the all the pieces. Personally, my favorite is epic. I just love that zoomed in. I might have to collect a couple here in the coming weeks. The last trait that we had as part of the project is time of day. This one wasn't as obvious to me, but kind of is obvious. So do you mind providing a little bit of further clarity just for everybody's reference?
Do you want to grab this one, Rick, or do you want me? I don't want to keep talking.
No. So that was basically the difference between night and day, but also between the side that the shadow fell on the cube. So if you flip between them, you'll notice that it flips. If I'm right in saying that, am I, Rich?
Yeah, that's right. And it is deliberately, we put it in thinking it'd be quite fun to see if people actually noticed. Just quite a few people, I think, kind of haven't. So we've got, sort of like dusk and dawn are the sort of like, the sort of the night kind of twilight kind of time. So they're the dark ones. And then morning, afternoon, if you flip between them, what you actually notice, now we pointed it out, is that the dark side kind of switches. So the idea is that the light kind of is being cast from like, kind of like east to west and then west to east, depending on what time of day you're on. And again, just quite a nice, interesting that the idea I think we had there is that people could then potentially kind of like pair them up. So you could then have like the same palette and have a morning and afternoon kind of piece side by side, and you would then get this kind of sort of sense of that sort of shift between them. So
got it. And it looks like you kept them consistent too, right? So twilight, there are no twilights in the morning or afternoon.
Yeah, so that's it. So it kind of gives you kind of, I suppose, like, sort of buy one, get one free in terms of a trait that you kind of get. Where's the light coming from? And then also, is it going to be one of like the night palettes or one of the daytime palettes? And on the night palettes, I pretty much just for a bit of fun, we did for quite a while have some palettes with kind of multiple colored lights as well. So we had, I think it was in neon, and then like circus. We had all these kind of ones for like all different kind of colored lights. So I think the only one we kept that's got that is Orange Ruin. I think the lights in Orange Ruin are slightly different. So if you actually kind of look, you'll notice that you get actually like a sort of slightly darker orange, and then it's a couple of sort of like mid oranges as well. So I think I'm right in saying that's the only one that's got those different coloured lights in, Rich?
That one is a nod to both me and Rich are slightly Lord of the Rings nerds. So it was originally called Mount Doom, and then he came out with this name. What was it, Rich? It was.
It's actually I'm going to look like even more of a nerd. It's actually the Sindarin name for Mount Doom, so it's still a Lord of the Rings reference, but it just sounded cooler than Mount Doom until you explain it, and then it doesn't sound cooler at all.
Come on, Rich is from New Zealand. He's got to love Lord of the Rings.
Well, hey, I love it. That's perfect excuse. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I feel vindicated because I did say Lord of the Rings with this one, and yeah, I I that's amazing. I love it. I love that you guys did that. That's so cool, and I love how there's different lights in here. I was trying to figure out like are the lights in the path of the lava the ones that are more orange, but it doesn't look like it. Either way, I love that you guys put that little Easter egg in here. Honestly, it's so fun. And maybe we can transition over now to the three that you wanted to highlight. And I didn't want to say your favorite three because, as we talked about earlier, I feel like it's unfair to ask you to pick out favorites of all of your children here, at least if you think of them that way. But yeah, were there what three would you like to highlight? And maybe you could tell us why you chose them. And perhaps Rich, we could go with you first, and then Rick.
Yeah, cool. So I got three and then had two bonus ones. So we touched actually one of the bonus ones was the 150, which is the CMYK with no water. And it was just so perfect that there was only one, because when me and Rick were kind of chatting, I was like, I'd love it if we got one or two of these would be so cool, just because they just hit different. There's also my own child 41. So, and again, because it's an Apollo, so that for me is kind of just quite a special one. Yeah, that's probably more of a pick for myself. In terms of kind of, I suppose what I think are the kind of quote unquote kind of best, 165, which is a CMYK, because I think as Jared mentioned, CMYK for me does hit different. When Rick kind of suggested this kind of idea of kind of going, hey, why don't we kind of do something that are kind of tied, like, the sort of like the print thing. I was like, that is just genius. That is such a cool idea and such an organic way for us to kind of explore different colored water without it just feeling like we've just shoehorned it in for no reason. And that one for me, just with those kind of like the sloping sides, is probably just one of my favorite kind of CMYKs. 274, which is a micro parchment. So it's the only micro parchment owned by Ida there. I suppose if I kind of think what's the kind of like the sort of heart in terms of kind of like the collection of just kind of summing up kind of what we were maybe setting out to do early on, I think that maybe kind of captures it. It's just understated. It's got a real sense of kind of being alive with kind of all this water kind of coming through. And I do like the high scale ones. I think when they're printed, they're great fun for people to kind of, almost like dive in, and it's a bit like kind of Where's Wally or Where's Waldo, depending on where you are. You kind of almost want, expecting someone to poke their head out of one of the windows and say hi to you. And then rounding out would be 285, which is Twilight palette. And again, for me, just because it just harks back to kind of, I think when we first had this palette, it's probably sometimes in a project you kind of get an output early on, you go, yeah, this if we nail what we're setting out to do, this is going to be really special. And I think Twilight, one of those outputs for me is one of the first that I was like, yeah, okay, if we can do this justice and see it out, knew that we were kind of onto something kind of pretty special. So those would be my three picks.
Beautiful, and I love that. Thank you for explaining that. These are amazing picks. Rick, which ones did you have?
So I particularly like 177. I don't know if Rich could pull that up. And what I love about it is it's the generative aspect. This is by chance. This has happened that it's all water above, and it's kind of leading down to a little settlement with all the lights on. It almost feels like it was intentional. Like the lights are being powered by the water movement or something. And for me, that was just a real little gem that. Really feels like it's come to life. So I particularly like that one, and the chance of that happening. I think there's only one like that. And then, funnily enough, next to that is 178, and I just really like that scale. It really gives you a sense of what goes into them. And I think for print, like Rich said, the ones that are really zoomed out, they're amazing, and you could just stare at it for ages. But I quite like these real close-ups too. They've got a lot of sort of contrast strength to them. And then lastly, I try and remember which one it was. It was 246. So if Rich can find that. That's down in the corner there. So I just love how by chance something so simple has happened there. And I think that's for me, it's a great joy for me to kind of enter into generative art and, you know, experience it with Rich, because, you know, a lot of it is outside of your control. You can create some parameters, but you never know what the results will be. And I like these little quirky ones that just by chance happen. And that's just simplicity in that I love.
Yeah, these are fantastic too, and it's funny how we key on the extremes with the ones that are zoomed in really closely, and then the ones that are further out. And just before Jared, you jump to yours, I want to just point out to people viewing, this is number 178 that Rick had just pointed out, and zoom in, like look at the detail in the shadowing, right? You can see how here clearly the sun is coming from the left side here, and you can see how the shadows were created. So, bravo on those details. I just wanted to interject there.
Yeah,
Jared,
I also like how you can see like the bend of the water, like the edge show through faintly. Like it's pretty amazing when you start to like get into the zoom. Let's see here. The CMYK with no drip 150. It's been mentioned a ton of times. That was one of my top three. I just think it's one of those that we're always about like the generative work that's unintended outputs or those rare outputs. The God mode Fidenza, the goose ringer. This one just is reminiscent of it. It's so brilliant because it lacks something that is supposed to be so distinctive in that palette, and it just, I don't know. The more I went through the collection, I kept coming back to it. The Iridian, I really, really wanted to put in there, but that was like in my top four, so I ended up not doing it. But so I'll go with my number two choice was number 86. It's actually, I love the graphite palette, as mentioned earlier. Our friend of the podcast, DeFi, owns this one, and this one just the way it almost like the transparency of the I'll call it the black water flow felt somewhat, I'll call it familiar and somewhat of a distant fact. I mean, literally today I just posted about how I'm enamored with my graphite anti-cyclone, and there's something about it that the graphite palettes just to me bring me back to a hand sketch. Like I really connect, or I feel like I have a connection with the artist anytime I see this graphite palette. I could really envision one of you two sketching this thing out, or dreaming it up and putting it on a plotter. I mean, there's just something so brilliant about this. And conversely, on the other end of the spectrum is 125. It's one of 5 blueprints, and for me, being an engineer, I just love the blueprint. Like it again, the transparency of it. It felt like there was some engineer with his pocket protector and TI-83 calculator just jamming away on this thing, figuring it out. And the way this one came together, especially the water flow in particular, had a deep resonance with me. Another one of my favorite fxhash projects is Tesseract, and the way the water flowed on this one in particular was reminiscent of it, and it just kind of felt like there was a natural, I'll call it, cadence to it. And I almost felt like one of these could be like a little hot tub, and I was going to be sitting in it just chilling.
I just wanted to say as well that aside from picking out favorites, the trait that I love the most, and I've always had such pleasure with, is the pools. If you watch the pools animated, it's so nice to watch. Rich did such an amazing job with the vector maps.
Absolutely. I actually was just noticing that as well, how some of them have pools. Here's a great example of one right here, how the water pools over here. Yeah, okay. So many questions, but let me go with my 3 real quick, just for the sake of time. So the 3 that I picked out was firstly number 141. I love the Twilight palette, and I love the symmetry of this one. This is one of the reflections, and just yeah. I mean, I just was scrolling through the Twilights because I knew I had to pick one of those. It just hits for me perfectly. And then the next one that I wanted to point out is number 275. So this again is a reflection, but this one is really unique. Not only is it a reflection, but it is the Aura Druin palette, and then it is a bold inverted. So it's quite rare. I know we don't really look at rarities that much, but you're not going to see. Maybe it's the only one of that. I didn't look through everything, but I was looking through the bold inverteds because I love that, and this one struck my eye more than the rest of them. And the last one that I picked was a monitor, number 152. I said it before, but I love this palette. I think it's fantastic. And apologies for the dog screaming in the background, but let's transition it over to kind of like our favorite game here, which is you have a certain amount of fake money, and you can buy whichever ones you want off of the floor. In this case, we are going to go with 10,000 Tezos. Or sorry, you don't have to buy it off the floor. You can buy whatever you want, but you have 10,000 Tezos. What would you buy with that? And maybe we can do it similarly. We'll go Rich and then Rick, and then Jared and I can go. So fake money, no consequences. Don't have to tell your partner about it.
That's the best kind of money. No explanations needed. If you're a numbers nerd, I think someone's actually put up the first mint number one for exactly 10,000 Tez. So if you like kind of having the first 10,000 Tez and done, so that's forward approach. And again, it's a super cool output as well. Parchment to me is just one of those really nice, just kind of such a pure feel about it. If you don't just want to throw it all in a one, I would start actually with it. I think the piece is actually right on the floor at the moment, 130. So, and again, just lovely Apollo. I've already kind of mentioned I have a real soft spot for that palette anyway. It's also got, there's a little kind of sort of hidden trait as such. So some of the outputs, what will actually happen is when the water is kind of in one of like the straight kind of carriers, it will always use the same type of kind of carrier all the way down that water flow. So you'll see in this one, it's always got the kind of stepped edges where it's kind of dropping down on the sort of like a running kind of slope. So it's got that little secret in there as well. I would grab 186. Just because I think if you're building out a kind of a collection, it would be a real shame. So 186 is 4,000 Tez. Sorry if that helps track it down. There you go. So that's a CMYK on the far left there, because I think if you're building out a collection, you want a CMYK. There's just something just awesome about them. And then I've got 187, which is just directly above that as well. And again, I love the reflected kind of sort of like mountainside. For me is probably my kind of favorite of the reflections.
I don't know if I've seen this in a lot of them, but that has like a split waterfall edge.
Yeah. So it's got really quite an interesting. Yeah. So the splitter is, again, that's something that just has a random chance to kind of happen. So kind of when the water's kind of plodding down, it just has this chance every now and then to kind of sort of split out. So some of them will have several of those. Most of them will have none. But again, I just really like that. And just for me, the parchment palette just kind of, I think, ties back to kind of what we wanted. It's kind of feel like a printed kind of like hand kind of ink done kind of piece. And I think there's some that kind of really speak to that. So yeah, that'd be my three to spend my imaginary 10,000 Tez on.
Fantastic. And Rick, how would you irresponsibly spend your fake money?
Yeah, I'm quite good at spending fake money. So I found this a real challenge, actually. I only own one, and I picked it up off the floor when they were about 250 Tez. We didn't even keep any reserves for ourselves. I'm kind of kicking myself about it still. But I would be so happy with any and just add to my collection. But I did, like Rich said, having number one would be pretty cool, and that's your whole 10K gone. Otherwise, I'd seek out something with a pool, or maybe two pools, if there are any with two pools. That you can't find that as a trait, but you'd have to just spot it, because like I said, I just love watching the water animate through the pools and fill them up. There are some bigger pools, like extra large pools somewhere. So yeah, I'd probably pick out something with a pool. And Yeah, it's just really tricky. Favorite palette. I mean, I said my favorite palette's possibly slate. There's a slate with, which is dry with no water, and that's quite unique. Sorry, I can't remember the number of it, but that might be something I would like to pick up. It's just a dry climate.
Fantastic. Well, if I see one with two pools near the floor, I will be reaching out to you to let
Oh,
you
that'd be
know.
great. Thanks.
Jared, what did you pick with your
If you scroll
10K?
down to probably the largest meme of the area to the price of 6969, this one, even though it's a big chunk of our fictitious Tez, number 260, it's just so symmetric and no water. It's dry. It feels like something beautiful. To me, it's so reminiscent of an archetype in that repeatable geometry, but there's just all these like little hidden nooks along the way, and almost like a bell tower right at the top with that window and door. I don't know. There's something beautiful about it. I know, I know this is supposed to be a water-oriented theme, and going after a non-water one is for your top pick is probably sacrilegious. But I don't know, man. The amount of symmetry, the scale on this one, just the coloring. Uh,
It's interesting that you picked that one because do you know what? When I was going through trying to make some decisions about all this, I spotted that one and I'd never seen it before, and it really popped. I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting. That really stands out." So it's funny that you picked that.
yeah, I
It
mean,
looks inverted too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I love the collection and just the way like this one just looks different to me. Like I don't know how else to say it. Like it just it hits differently. It's unique, and it's like it's amazing in all the right ways. And again, I go back to the algorithm. Probably wasn't intended, but the output just it has a deep resonance with me. Um, for more fictitious tests, since I kind of blew most of it really early, I would say going up to 1700 tes number 318 for me was something that I thought was a beautiful, that there's a lot of darker palettes, but some of these lighter ones really pop for me. And this orange palette, I really like the taxi one, but this orange palette I felt with the beautiful aqua water was something stunning. And I just liked how most of the water flow kind of was contradictory to the natural flow of the architecture. So at that price, it just felt I might have to go spend 10,000 real tes tonight. I'm not kidding.
And I gotta say, I didn't even notice this before, but you almost have like some stairs leading to nowhere here, right? You kind of have like this aqueduct and stairs, so that's a cool little thing there as well.
Yeah, and then because I'm now even have a less of a pocket, I think I'd probably pick the one up off the floor at 130. And as Rich pointed out, this is actually a really beautiful piece. I know Simon says is liquidating a couple stuff for some other acquisitions, according to Grailer. So I feel like this is kind of a real gem at the floor right now. So another consideration, honestly.
I love those pieces, and I just want to highlight something for the listeners. So, Jared, you may not have done this on purpose, but number 318 here, in addition to the first one you mentioned, is also a inverted, I think probably a regular inverted. And what's so fun about this is Jared and I have been doing this for a while now. You start realizing different categories and different themes that you enjoy in collections, not necessarily this one. And probably now Jared can go through and look for inverted ones specifically, whereas he might not have before. So I wanted to point that out. My 10K Tez. So the first one that I picked was this one down here at number 180, which is a monitor. There is a cheaper monitor, but I like this one that was a little bit more zoomed out, and I just love the monitor. It's like the Matrix to me. That's like how I think of it. And so that one, I thought, okay, I'd have to grab a monitor. Then scrolling down, I actually may need to call a little bit of an audible, but there's something about this one that really struck my eye, number 216. So I'd spend 4,000 tes on this. Just the way that the water is flowing kind of opposite to the fixed direction of the rest of the structure. I enjoyed that juxtaposition a lot. I don't know why. It really caught my eye, that orderliness, but then the kind of going against the orderliness, which I thought was really cool. And then, honestly, I think I might need to pull an audible here because originally, where is it? Originally, I really don't know between these two. These two, I might have to flip a coin because I do love this graphite. I think it's beautiful. I love how it has a large pool, and I'm going to click into that so people can see it. But then the CMYK is also just classic for this collection. And for you, Rick, I want people to see the animation here. I feel like we didn't show this enough, but to see that large pool filling up, I mean, that's just so cool how you figured out how long it would take with the depth and all that. So anyways, those are my picks, jumping around a little bit, but wanted to, yeah, man, I mean, we're running up on time here. I just wanted to ask you guys a really quick question. I'm going to unshare my screen here so folks can see again. Are you working on something again now? Or you currently have anything? What next? Acequia, Acequia. Oh my God, part two. Or what? You guys have anything up your sleeves these days?
Yeah, we've talked.
We're both like, kind of.
We always, I think we always planned, once we did miniscapes, we kind of had it in our minds that we'd at least do three, so that there is going to be a third collab, but we're just working on personal projects at the moment, and we need to get together and we've got some ideas. We've definitely got some direction, but we need to have that initial chat, and yeah, there will be a third collab.
You heard it here first. That's exciting. I know that the listenership will probably start bugging you guys, but we appreciate it. We love the final product, and it's exciting, especially from the pains I have from missing this project, to be able to have another shot at things. So this is really exciting to hear.
Yeah, well, so that's our show. We really appreciate you all coming on. Where's the best place to send folks to find you?
So Twitter is normally the best bet side. I think I'm rich__Poole for some reason. I think the first underscore must have been taken. So yeah, Twitter. Otherwise, as Jared mentioned, I tend to hang out across like quite a few Discords. So yeah, you can find me in Graylers, Tender, fxhash, gmdao, gen.art. Main fxhash. So almost kind of anywhere where I kind of like released work, I try and make a point of being around just because. It's always cool just to chat to people, people kind of wanting prints, people just want to know a bit more about a collection. So I try and be as available as possible to, whether it's chat to collectors, chat to other artists. It's just a nice way to kind of sort of break up your day sometimes. So it's not just you and a keyboard exclusively.
Yeah, well, I spend way too much time on Twitter. There's far too much going on and so many good people to chat with. So you can find me there. Rick A. Crane is my handle, or The Paper Crane is my sort of company name. So yeah, you can find me there. And I just wanted to say thanks so much for having us on. It's been a fantastic experience. I just beyond expectations how the project's gone, and I've met so many new people from it. Lots of people from sort of ETH coming over, and lots of new followers and people interested in my work. And I'm just very grateful to have met Rich by chance and worked together, and it worked so well together. It's been fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we say thank you too. I mean, thank you for taking that time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for putting all the effort into the work. I mean, I know that it was probably painful at times and trying to get it just right, but you guys really did. And I think you're seeing a reflection of that. And so this is just another step on that. I think the collectorship will really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and showcase your work and get to a whole nother level. I mean, I don't know about you, Jared, but now I want to buy more. I'm like, okay, like where do I free up some Tez now? Because now that I know more about the project, I'm like, okay, there's some really cool stuff in here that I hadn't noticed before.
I literally just DM'd the owner of that one for 6969, seeing if we can do some sort of I want to negotiate an offer in advance because I think it's just so bomb. not that I don't mind setting the record sale, but I'm absolutely fascinated with it. So 100%, I'm enamored with it. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I know it's late for you, Rick. Thank you for going into the wee hours of the night. Rich, hopefully this gave you the jolt you needed to get a little bit of extra pep in your step in your day. We're truly grateful for not only the art, but the time and attention that you're giving to the listenership and allowing us to have a little bit of a sneak peek into the genius that was behind this project. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. It's nice to be able to share a lot of stuff that is otherwise not really known, or it stayed with us, and it's nice to go into detail. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really nice to kind of, I think, sometimes justify and explain kind of anything from small decisions to kind of big decisions. I think it kind of gives a nice insight into why the collection is what the collection is. But I'll hit Rick up and we'll see whether at some point we'll try and put something together to do a dive into some of these things that kind of got left on the cutting room floor as well. It could be quite fun.
Yeah. Please let us know if we do. We'll make sure to put it out to all of our followers. And for everybody listening, we really appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more great art and great artists like Rich and Rick. We're at collectors_XYZ. I'm at Aston Cloud. Jared is at Jared_pause. And just want to note, Jared is also the founder of the 8NAP Digital Asset Fund. So if you're interested in getting some exposure to some of this great art, reach out to him. And with that, I'll say thank you to our fantastic guests. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into Collector's Corner. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you like this episode and want to help us out, please subscribe and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow us on YouTube. Please also follow us on Twitter for announcements as we expand to other social and content platforms. Our Twitter handle is at collectors_XYZ. We'd also love to hear any feedback you have, so please comment or reach out. We're always striving to be more useful and get better so we can help you in your collecting journey. The Collector's Corner team and their guests are not registered investment advisors. All views expressed on this podcast are personal opinions and are not specific inducements to make particular investments or investment strategies, and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. This show is solely for informational and entertainment purposes only. Before making any financial decisions, please consult a professional.